Call the meeting to order. Clerk, call the roll.
Tarazinski?
Here.
Neely?
Here.
Parker?
Here.
Conlon? Parch?
Here.
Tuttle?
Here.
5 present.
Declare that we have a quorum. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to participate? If you're not here, please let us know. No. Okay. Let's move on to approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Once again, because it is within 30 days, we do actually approve the minutes. This is an initial approval. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay. Any additions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So then let's move on to our substantive agenda item. And that substantive agenda item has us considering a few different policies tonight. The investment policy was done last time. And then tonight, we are going to consider the budget policy, fund balance policy, and the revenue and expenditure policy. And so why don't we take those in order and go through the changes in those policies, and if there's anything else of concern in those policies, by all means, we will consider that as well. So let's take up the budget policy first. There's a change in number 11 to go to 30% of expenditures less the property tax revenue. I'm going to hold off discussion of that because it's really relevant to the fund balance policy, which is just being pushed through to this document. Then a cleanup to add the word advisory in number 12 for Finance Advisory Committee. And that's it for that particular document. So I would suggest that we move on to the fund balance policy. And unless there's a problem with these policies, we will address them as an omnibus at the end of our discussion. Yeah.
Okay.
Is this fund balance?
This relates to the budget policy, and
Okay, sure.
if we're gonna bring it all together around
Sure.
the circle, that's fine with me, and wait to the end. Is that what you prefer?
Go ahead.
A couple things. Just starting with the purpose of this, looking at that first sentence, we say, within the city's ability to pay, which I applaud, and kind of just saying that that's about like a balanced budget approach when we say ability to pay. Because later on, we say we don't want to use reserve balances for any normal operations. They're supposed to be for, and that gets into the fund.
Where are you, Tom?
I'm just in the very first line. The purpose, the very first line. The city manager shall submit, and it says, within the city's ability to pay.
It's attachment A.
Attachment A.
Yeah, no, that's right. Oh, yeah, all right. Fine.
All right.
Okay.
And in my mind, I'm thinking that kind of calls for a balanced budget. We don't use that term here, and it's not used anywhere, actually, per se. I don't know if that's relevant to anybody. It's okay with me, understanding what it is we're trying to accomplish there. It's been that way for a while.
I think that, even though there can be, and I'm talking in general, I'm not talking about the city of DeKalb itself, even though there can be a little bit of sleight of hand that is involved in some of these types of documents, I think the understanding is that you always present a balanced budget.
A balanced budget.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we should use the term balanced budget in lieu of, that's kind of where I was headed, but it's not a huge deal to me.
If that's what you really aim, I'm sorry.
No, what I was going to say is that I have no objection to that, But the definition of a balanced budget can be very, very difficult.
Right.
And therefore, there are circumstances, let's say that we have built up our fund balances. There are circumstances in which you could have a nominally, and accounting-wise, you could have an unbalanced budget that is still an annual budget which would be within the city's ability to pay without compromising your fund balances. Depending on what happens.
Yeah. We're really talking about budgeted use of unassigned funds, really. That's really what we're talking about, is eating into fund balance, which in a balanced budget review, in my mind, you wouldn't budget to use, because they are supposed to be for extraordinary circumstances most of the time, which you don't know, right?
But it
But you
doesn't,
can have a
Budget.
surplus.
Yes, you could.
You could have a surplus, and it is a reasonable matter of policy as to whether you spend surplus funds or you utilize those funds. For example, utilizing them as a transfer or utilizing them as an investment would be something that wouldn't be necessarily inconsistent.
Well, the term ability to pay, I think in the general context of people who read this, or the citizens.
If we go backwards,
It's kinda-
if we submitted a budget, if they submitted a budget which was not within the city's ability to pay, we wouldn't consider that a balanced budget, would we?
Right,
No,
that's kind of my
correct.
point.
Well,
For emergency, if you get too, I think, because I hear what you're saying, but it's like, if we get too strict on the terminology we're using, and, because there's always exceptions, and if
But
it's still
there's-
within the ability to pay, then.
what is the ability to pay?
Yeah, it's the same question.
I mean, all you have to do is look at Harvey
Oh,
with respect to their police. And I don't know if you followed the story, but the courts have now said, no, no, no. And the state has also been told this. You have to tax. You have greater ability to pay than you have shown in your revenues. So ability to pay and willingness to pay
Yeah.
are two different items, and I don't want to get into an argument.
I just thought
about
of
that.
it in a general context of what the citizens think of, and even what the council thinks of. The term balanced budget, I think, is,
Well, give me-
to your point, it may be a little more confining, but I think that's what I would be after.
Can you give me a simple definition of balanced budget?
So the general, I would say, for accounting in the world of finance, a balanced budget in where I've been through is, it is paying for your expenditures with revenues or fund balance.
Right.
Well, that's the
So,
key.
That's
if you're
right.
thinking of balanced
Yeah.
budget just in revenues covering expenditures, that's not a true
yeah.
definition of what balanced budget is.
Well, I'm fine with this then.
Me too.
You can actually borrow to make
people
your
do borrow.
balance.
See, but we do go on later on to indicate that we should not use those revenues for
Right,
ongoing.
and that's why I think we just don't
Yeah.
go there, even though we understand that normally your objective is to balance revenues and
Right,
expenditures.
and the city council has been reasonably adamant about it.
And in the long term, you have to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you a long time ago.
it got settled, doesn't matter.
Okay.
All
I'm
right.
easy.
Anything else on the
Yeah.
budget chart?
Item 4.
Okay,
In here, we say that we will monitor on a monthly basis. Revenue expenditures shall be prepared and made available, and hopefully we're doing that.
yeah.
And then there's a quarterly budget summary. But nowhere does it say, and it is in one of the upcoming ones, is that the city manager should impose spending limits if revenues are below original estimates. So we're monitoring here, we say we monitor, but we don't call for any corrective action. There's no action item there, which I would think
But-
we should have. And there isn't an action item in any of the budget area.
But, okay, here's the problem that you have, okay? And ever since day one of the Finance Advisory Committee, I've been pushing on this particular topic. I agree with you, but the problem is, what are expected revenues?
Well, that's part of their job to monitor that. They're monitoring that, which implies there's some knowledge.
Well,
If
but-
we're short, like we know we're short this year,
But that's not the point. Okay, the point is that revenues and expenditures flow unevenly through the fiscal year.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're into, May, we will have received, the way that the budget's done, we will have received 0 property tax revenue. So you will show us way behind on property tax revenue. Is that an actionable item? Well, I would say no.
No.
That's not an actionable item.
No. But
Say, go ahead.
if we budgeted, say, 240 or 250,000 to come back to us from the county, and we now know that that isn't going to happen as part of our revenue stream this year, and we know that that's a shortfall to our existing budget, I'm hoping that when we monitor something, we therefore not only monitor it, we take a corrective action, which is called for.
As appropriate.
And my comment is that it's nowhere in the budget policy do we say that.
No, I agree with you on
And I'm
that.
asking we should put that in.
Well, that goes back to a question I had a couple meetings ago. How soon can we see monthly financials? How do you, and you said right now because of the software.
So there's natural, right, so the software inhibits us from turning stuff around fairly quickly or in an easy to show report out of the system. So we do take time to try to put it in a more easy kind of review type report. But we do give monthly kind of year-to-date budget and actual information every month to City Council. So it's usually the second meeting of every month. There is a report there. The quarterly update for the first 3 months of this fiscal year should be at the second meeting next month. So if you think January, February, March are the first quarter, and we should have some report for you at the end of May. So there's that kind of delay there. But then there's some revenues that are inherently delayed that, like income tax. By the time income taxes are paid to the state, they do the collection, they turn around who receives the income tax. There's a natural delay in that, which is noted in those year-to-date reports. You'll see kind of the month and then the collection date. So we have something that goes to City Council every month that we can look at. And then the quarterly report one is the one that, when we had talked back in January, that I would bring to this group for us to look at. So that'll be at the end of
Yeah, and the same thing, you're talking about property taxes. You'll do an annual budget, but also you got to have a monthly budget. It's not showing any property tax until June or whatever.
So we do a line item budget, not a monthly budget. So the details and everything, how it's budgeted is by an annual amount. Some of the revenue monitoring, like Chair Petal said, we know property tax comes in at certain times of the month. You can also look at it if you're kind of siloing one revenue. So if all we focus on is sales tax, well, then you're missing that, the state released that personal property replacement tax is going to come in higher for the city. So there's some kind of ups and downs between all of the revenues. And then when we know things are going to be different than what we've budgeted for, $245,000.
Right, we know that, right?
That's on our list. I'm very aware of it. We're working with City Council. We have 2 members that have been a part of going over that county intergovernmental agreement and where we're going, what approach we're going to take. So once something comes out of that discussion, we will come back to council, and if it is to keep the $245,000 payment to the county in the budget, then we'll recommend a budget amendment at that time. And with that, I'll give council options. Do we take it from fund balance because this is something that is one-time in nature in this budget? Do we look to other sources of revenue? So there'll be options when we come with that amendment to City Council.
I would like to take up Tom's concern very directly, though. I think that, I share that concern, and let me try something out, and, we can work on the wording.
Okay.
But in number 4, I would append another sentence. okay? At least on a quarterly basis. At least on a quarterly basis, any variances from budget of revenues and/or expenditures shall be reconciled and considered for corrective action.
That's kind of what I'm after. The
Get an
corrective action.
exception report.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
interesting enough, in 20 minutes, we're going to come to the revenue and expenditure policy, and there's a very explicit statement that says, the city manager should impose spending limits if his or her, in their judgment, revenues will be below original estimates. Staff should review and monitor on a monthly basis expenditures on a monthly basis. That implies that we're monitoring it January for January, February for February, and March for March. Now, I'm assuming our expenditures are not running out of line, other than we've had one extraordinary expense, right, with the city manager. That costs whatever that costs, right? So those things need corrective action now, in my opinion, not in May after we look at a quarterly report. If I'm a city manager, I would be taking I would be looking to how do I correct that, at least begin to think about how I correct that now. Which means,
Well, and that's actually not inconsistent with what I was saying.
yes, no, it isn't.
You know, because I said at least.
Yeah.
And,
This is even a stronger statement than the one you proposed.
right.
Okay,
It is.
I'm fine with it.
And I mean, we can,
We can work on the language. I'm happy with that.
so do we want to introduce that in here?
I would second the motion, I would make that motion.
Okay, so let's get wording then. Okay.
What page was that? Like-
This
This is item 4 under the budget policy.
No, the language you cited in the other policy.
It is
Here.
item 3 under revenue and expenditure policy.
All right, let me see that.
You could almost,
Lift it.
Well,
Lift it.
I don't know if it's global enough to
Okay.
lift it. That
it doesn't talk about excessive
doesn't talk
expenditures.
about revenue.
It talks about revenue.
Yeah, but it doesn't talk about expenditure.
Right.
We might-
And we have both this year.
Should review and monitor on ministers. I think that what we could say is deviations from is deviations the right word? Deviations from budgeted amounts should be noted.
Variances sounds a little
All right,
less.
variances in, variances from annual budgeted amounts. Variances from annual budgeted amounts should be reconciled and remediated as soon as possible. And no less frequently than on a quarterly basis.
I guess my question would be, what does remediation mean?
Yeah.
Taking it to
Corrective
fund
action.
balance?
Well,
Corrective action.
remediation means taking corrective action, and that is, what that corrective action is going to depend upon what's recommended by staff, what the city council wants to do. I don't think you can define what that
So it could
remediation
be
is.
Anyway, could be
Right.
remediated
But if
in
you're
any
going
manner.
to use, if you're going to use fund balance, you would typically have to go to city council.
So
Right,
my-
exactly.
I
My
mean, that-
question is, if the remediation at the time, because this is a very frequent look at the budget numbers, if you're looking monthly, as Tom Tom Trzynski would prefer, or quarterly in your statement, that there can be swings. So
So you're talking about the choppiness?
So if some of the remediation, could that be, and then I don't know if remediation or is it, and I think that's why monitor's on here, because I don't know if I necessarily, in some cases, would want to make a change
That's,
until we get a
may
little
not.
bit
all right.
further.
I'll give you a perfect example, okay? Carson's is closing. We were getting some sales tax revenue from Carson's. There is an immediate need at some point out that the sales tax revenue that we counted on from Carson's, be it big or small, that needs to be dealt with, and there should be no question about dealing with it immediately, because we know.
So, but my question is, so we know that,
Yeah.
where we know the big sales for most departments have occurred, and we've captured that in this first quarter.
Right.
If the difference to go down in sales tax for that is a smaller amount, is now offset by what PPRT would come in, so the action would be to make no change, because
It could be.
one's coming in higher, one's coming in lower.
Yeah, no, that's-
That's why I'm asking, is it
That's fine.
just,
That's
we
very-
call it out
Well,
in the report and say, you know, we recommend no change because we know this is
right,
occurring.
That's
exactly.
okay, but you
That's
gotta
fine.
take the
That's
correct-
fine. You have to put it
My
on the
corrective
table.
action is I'm not taking any
Right.
because I have an
A
offset.
corrective action can be no.
Right, if you've got a
nothing.
natural offset, fine.
Okay, so
problem.
then that would be if, from the monitoring portion from finance staff, if I start
Right.
adding into that year-to-date report that we see every month, right now it doesn't, it just really gives the numbers, there's not a lot of.
It
narrative
doesn't
it. You
need to
wanna-
be in that report.
Right?
It-
We
it-
already know. The example he gives and the
that's-
one I give, you know.
Right.
We know our
And-
expenditures are up 125 from that one action item, and we're down 240 in revenue.
But at the same time, okay, now, here's why it gets a little bit more complex. You're not employing a city
I
manager
understand.
during that time.
I understand.
So you need to,
Understand, that can be
Offset.
part of it, but you gotta take that corrective
right, you have to
action.
take some kind
You
of, you have to reevaluate.
Well, that's where your
And,
reconciliation comes in.
Right.
The point of
and that's why
reconciling is to say,
I
I've got
like-
offsets.
I
too.
like the term reconciliation, you know, that's the first thing. You know, you need to reconcile that with the budget, and if you reconcile it, you're gonna have the pluses and the minuses. And there also should not be a presumption that all of these changes are going to be deviations that are negative. You can
Right.
have positive deviations, too.
Yeah.
And so, we just want to ensure that we don't come down to the last 3 months of the year where you have to make some kind of hard decisions.
Right.
And, you know, you want to be on top of these things, just like you would be with your own personal budget. And we're really not asking, in my opinion, we're not asking staff to do anything except act as prudent managers of the funds. We're not asking for any new reports. We're not asking for any new research. What we're saying is, okay, you've produced this report, now take a look at it and what are the implications of that particular report. And all that we're trying to do is ensure that somebody's looked at it and said, is this something material that we need to be
Yeah.
adjusting?
Right.
I mean, there can be changes, and they may not be material. I mean, is it really, you know, is it material to?
Yeah. Did we address is this addressed in your?
No, so my question is, I don't disagree with having that stuff noted, and, you know, personally, I have it, but because we're appending it to number 4, essentially, which is that monthly and quarterly budget report, what I'm saying is, right now, it's mainly figures, charts, and numbers. If it's more transparent or easier to do, we can kind of add here's the things we're watching to that report, if that
That's-
makes it.
I don't think we're micromanaging to
No,
that level.
we don't want
If you would prefer to make it a separate item and just move everything down and put it as number 5 and then just move the numbers down, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
It's fine. I mean, if that does no violence to what we're suggesting in terms of making sure that we're explicit in the policy. And I think that the big thing is that we're not breaking any new ground,
No.
because it's in the
Right.
expenditure policy. And this is actually a little bit weaker, but it's saying that.
Well, it's still in there, so you gotta do this too.
Oh, no,
They're
no.
both.
No, I mean, you've got, this is more the 30,000-foot
Right.
view, and the other is, careful monitoring. And it's also real important to realize that these policies are not just general fund policies.
Is this number 4 where budget reports should be prepared and made available to city management staff for departmental review on a monthly basis? Are those available to us also?
So they're part of, usually they're at the second meeting for city council as part of the consent agenda, so you can get it on the website
Okay.
anytime.
The big thing is that what this number says is that we're going to look at these reports on a departmental basis, because there may be a problem in a department that is not shared citywide. A department's budget may be off, and you have to decide what kind of remediation
Yeah.
might be necessary. Is it something that's within the department's control? In which case, maybe the city as a whole needs to deal with it? Or is this something that there needs to be some remediation at the department level, where
The
something...
city manager should be taking corrective action anyway, and that's part of their job.
Right.
This is kind of at a higher city level here, that it's so material. So if I were to ask you today, if we're actually applying this policy that we currently have with this language in item 3 under the expenditure policy, are we offsetting our current budget-related issues? Have we taken any corrective action according to this?
Well, a lot of it's in the works, so the things that have come up as kind of deviations to the budget are the county IGA, so we're in the middle of discussing that, so when there's a decision, the budget will be amended. We've made progress on 912 Edgebrook, but there's still some more work from the Public Works Department, and they're waiting on feedback from the Annie Glidden North Task Force. So once we get kind of all the information that council's requested, get direction, then we'll adjust the budget if needed for that. The city manager one is more of a wait and see right now, because I know we had the mutual resignation that came with payout to the past city manager, but we've been working with an interim at, a minimal increase for the interim position. I also don't know, what expenses are gonna be for the external recruiter and the timeline from there on when we hire someone. So there could be, that's more of a wait and see on how long does that position remain vacant, to see what we can recoup, because it might offset the amount we've paid out now, so
Just
it's
as
on
an,
the list.
as an
right?
example, though, from a corrective action standpoint, you've got an itemized list there that's probably $500 to $600 grand. That's out of bed with our current budget. And I'm hoping we're taking corrective action now, knowing that in our forecast, those things are all gonna happen. You can debate if one amount's different or whatever, but the idea of bringing this up is that we take correction actions soon, immediately, as we forecast this list of problems that we have. So I'm hoping that we're doing that.
So we're doing it on a case-by-case basis right now, in that, when we looked to purchase the police and fire
Right.
radios, we looked at, fire looked and we're postponing the security measures for Fire Station 1, which offset about $60,000 of that purchase.
Okay.
So each time they come up, we'll have different kind of options. So the Edgebrick one, when it went to council, we had one where it was, you could do full fund balance or use part of, I can't remember, I think it was the Capital Projects Fund, I can't remember what the other fund was, and sell assets as another option to bring more revenue in to offset that expenditure. So I've been trying to put kind of different
A list.
list of packages.
See, now, those are
as
the
they
action
come up.
items that we're talking about
Yeah.
in such a statement, that we're doing that, we're monitoring, we see this big problem, we know it's coming, here's $500,000 or $600,000 to offset it.
But I
Boom, boom,
just
boom,
don't
boom.
have, I think what, I don't have like one comprehensive list with all the options of how we'd fund everything as one list. We're kind of tackling them as we go, but I have the full list and know what options we've given for this one and what options we've given for that. But they're on every council report shows the different options of how they could fund something and what we do.
Personally, I'm okay with that. I mean, because each one is a separate variance. And so a plan for dealing with each of the individual variances, that's
That's what we're talking about.
yeah, I mean,
That's what
that's,
we're talking
that's,
about.
yeah.
That's
So
fine.
I think
We're doing it.
That's fine. And, it sounds like we're doing it, and we
Okay.
just want to make sure that that's part of policy.
So you've inserted a sentence.
Correct.
I'll make a motion that we adopt
The budget
the
policy.
budget language as amended for item 4, as you suggested.
Carrie needs something.
Can we get clarification of that sentence? Because I know there was a major discussion, and so I wanted to make sure, are we approving it to include monitored, or are we keeping remediated?
Would you read back what you have at this time? Thank you.
Variances from annual budgeted amounts should be reconciled and remediated as soon as possible and no less frequently than on a quarterly basis.
Yep,
That's
that's it.
I'll second that.
Okay. Clerk, call the roll, unless there's an objection.
Terzinski?
Yes?
Neely?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
Conlon? Parch?
Yes.
Pedal?
Yes. Okay, let's move on to the fund balance policy. The fund balance policy, there's a little bit of a change here, and it may seem odd, but I'm convinced that it does make sense. Director Talkington and I met for about an hour, and she went over this with me. And I'm going to try to explain it in layperson's terms. And I think this is actually pretty responsible, the way that this is being presented to us, and I'll explain to you why. First of all, the expenditures that are in the general fund, based upon the recommendations of our auditors, they're for police and fire in particular. Those pension obligations are being counted as expenditures in the general fund. So they come in through the property tax, and then rather than having a transfer to the police and the fire funds, they're actually expenditures that are made to those funds. So the expenditures are being inflated in the general fund in the sense that that money, if it's in the levy for the pensions, okay, that money's not available to use in the general fund. And so it's a bit of an accounting artifact that it counts as an expenditure. Now, one of the things that is interesting, and correct me if I misstate this, but the county gave us a hassle on the tax levy this time and would not let the city levy for the corporate levy. The person at the county said it had to go into the pension levies, that we couldn't put a general corporate levy and then spend it on pensions, which is just absolutely ridiculous. True?
Yeah, it's the way she read how we wrote the ordinance, so going forward for this next tax levy, I was gonna work with her to try to make it more streamlined, so my understanding is the same understanding she has.
Yeah. And so for this year, at least, we're talking about 100% of the tax levy that is absolutely, positively has to go toward pensions because it's in a pension levy. Okay. So the idea was, all right, if you want to really be accurately considering the fund balance in the general fund based on general fund expenditures, then it would be appropriate to subtract out the expenditures that are for the pensions. Now, here's something that is an implication of the way that the city council chose to fund pensions this year. 600,000?
It's just under 500,000.
Just under 500,000 they're taking out of general fund revenues that their source was not the property tax levy. Those expenditures count toward general fund expenditures, and therefore by spending $500,000, they up the required fund balance by $150,000, or $125,000, $125,000, which is correct, I mean, according to what we've talked about. So what Molly and the interim city manager talked about is that they wanted to keep the fund balance requirement at roughly the same dollar amount that the fund balance is now. So 25% of the previously calculated expenditures would be 9.4 million? 9.4 million. So they said, all right, if we take that 9.4 million as a percentage of the new number, where you subtract off the pension, that really the fund balance, in order to maintain our standing, the dollar amount, which we thought was pretty good, would require us to have a fund balance policy of 30%. 30% of the new method of calculating the expenditures. So that's what this is about, and now I'll open it up for,
And this is a temporary
no,
issue, this is permanent.
this is a permanent issue.
It puts a little more emphasis on that property tax revenue is a very stable revenue for the city. We've heard through, the last rating review at Moody's that there's emphasis that we should, look to property taxes to pay fully for the pensions. And so every time we increase the police and fire obligations, so right now that 25% is actually on the whole $6.5 million of the pension. So we're keeping, by increasing that percentage from 25 to the 30%, you're still keeping about $1.5 million
Okay.
that we
I
found
see what
because
you're
of the
saying.
pension. So what happens is, so I use 600,000 because I think that's roughly about what we looked at last year with the actuaries, that what it'll be for the police and fire pensions this year, and we're just finalizing those actuarial reviews with them. If you add $600,000 to the police and fire pension, and you do it the old way, where it would still be 25% of all expenditures, well, now we're adding that $150,000 requirement to the general fund unassigned balance. if you do it where it's 30% less the property tax revenue, we're not taking $150,000 from other revenue sources. Essentially, the decision would then become, do we cut other services or find other revenues to pay for your pension obligation? Now, if city council goes down the path, or even if this group chooses to recommend that the increases in police and fire come from other revenues, well, actually, now you have to find $180,000 to satisfy that fund balance reserve. So, it's more in a recognition of, we have an obligation to pay these police and fire pension amounts, but to continue, if they're put onto the property tax levy and the property tax levy pays for those increases, you're not sacrificing as many services to pay for that fund balance obligation, or we're not looking to other revenue sources to maintain the services you have. So it's giving a little bit of relief in that case, but in the other turn, if the increases go with other general fund revenues, then we do have a higher amount that we find for that fund balance. So it's kind of
Essentially, it creates a
rebuilding that.
disincentive to use revenues outside of the property tax that are in the general fund. It creates a disincentive to use those to fund pensions. And that's something that the city council will have to consider. But that is one of the effects of this.
But it's addressing some of the comments we've received from, Moody's and other agencies, but I'm sorry.
Is this consistent with the other municipalities?
I've seen it in other municipalities. The reason why I shifted to say less the property tax revenue is because part of the pensions that we have now are not paid by property tax, so that would
Right.
still need to be treated just like any other expenditure. But in other places, such as Champaign, where I came from, their police and fire pension obligation in the general fund is treated as a transfer, and their fund balance policy is 10% of expenditures less transfers. So that police and fire obligation is excluded from their calculation. There
Well,
is like a $5 million.
I know I know how this was adopted, so when we did it, we looked at 4 or 5 highly regarded, well-managed communities. So we copied and pasted this to a large extent, municipalities, and I think we went to Naperville, St. Charles. We went to those that were highly regarded from a policy standpoint to lift policy ideas. And the way this was written was largely, not that there's much unique here is what I'm saying. We copied and pasted what was largely there, and we adopted to move quickly to get some policies in place. So that's where this came from. And the mechanism that you're describing of subtracting the revenue piece, not the expenditure piece, but the revenue piece from the expenditures, right? So last year, the city council, as an example, opted to fund the recommended amount, right? And that's an expenditure. And we want 30% of expenditures. So the higher that goes, to your point, the disincentive is the expenditures are going to be there. So we're going to take 30% of the expenditures less the property tax. And if the property tax is going down or eliminated, I mean, worst case, you had none, you'd have to fund 30% of the gross amount, right?
No.
So in fact, to hit this new number, if they did this year what they did last year, you would actually add to the fund balance objective.
Correct.
The fund balance objective would go up.
Right.
Not down.
By about
It
$150,000.
would have to go up to make the objective. So the goal isn't less, it's higher. If you did what you did last year, if you did it again this year.
Right, for
it
that
would-
portion that's
It
not
would result in a
funded.
higher number.
And so.
And you're saying
some of
other
the-
communities are doing this.
Other communities do, but also that 25% of expenditures, I know a lot of those communities, it's operating expenditures, which excludes transfers. And so I think there's some I found there was some confusion in what the 25% is. Now, when I calculated it, based on when I looked, the predominance of it
yeah.
was with transfers, so that's what
Yes.
it's calculated with.
Well, a lot of our transfers are pure expenses. It's like the airport fund, right now we're at a $600,000 deficit. Somehow we have to pay that off. That's an expense somewhere, right?
Right.
At some point.
And that's part of the issue here, is what, do you count transfers? Do you not count?
We are counting transfers so far, and
Yes, it does count.
I agree with
Right.
that,
Right.
because they're
Right.
almost all negative,
Yeah. No, I
almost all
agree.
unfavorable.
This is, so, when I
Which is
sat
more
back and
restrictive.
listened during kind of what FAC had to say last year, reading the information we got on our bond rating, and, I'm not sure what that sound is. And trying to address some of the concerns that I've heard over this last budget year, to put an emphasis on funding police and fire pension, at least police and fire pension through the property tax levy, was a key that I've heard from multiple people. So I think that this fund balance policy that I've recommended puts the emphasis on, here's the property tax levy, it's a stable revenue. So for the portions that are funded by that, we would treat differently than anything else funded by other revenues in the general fund, without losing the balance where we're at now. So that's that shift in the percentage. So I'm trying to keep it still in that $9 million range.
Yeah, the math works, at least in this period. I mean, it does come out to virtually the same number.
Yeah, I rounded up because it was like 29.7%, so I went with 30 because it's
It's
easier to do
around
that, right?
Steve, what do you think?
Well, I have to admit, that, like I told you, I haven't had a chance to read all this.
Fair enough.
But that makes perfect sense, eliminating the property tax, because it's really like a business, sales taxes, you collect it, you pay it, it's not an expense, it's just an in and out. So removing that from the expenditure side gets us to the number which we need to be concerned with.
Ron?
I understand it now, and I would agree it makes sense, and well, presented very well.
I understand it. I am hoping that the disincentive has some effect on council members to start looking at this and thinking, and taking, performing some sort of miracle to fix it, but,
That's always the unknown.
yeah, yeah.
I've made this comment before on the property tax piece. When we talk about property tax, we tend to exclude, and I'm not sure why we exclude in our conversations, our pilot tax and our 50% rebate of property tax that comes back to the city, which are not insignificant amounts when we talk about ongoing funding, because the pilot tax is a property tax in lieu of that we impose on the water department, which is $316,000, and the 50% sharing of the TIF that comes back to the city is pure property tax, because that's what its original revenue is. And that's significant too. That's $236,000 of property tax money coming to us in the back door through TIF. And when TIF goes away, we'll get 100% of that we can count, won't we? Right? So we're foregoing those conversations. So I've had this conversation with Chair Petal before, but when we say we only count that, there are some things in there that I think are repetitive taxes that are coming back to us through those mechanisms that we ought to be considering.
The difference is that those tax sources do not have any binding requirements on their use.
Well, when we say we have an obligation and we're going to pay it, if I go to the water department and I say, who's paying the water department FICA and who's paying the water department IMRF? You know who's paying that? The water revenue is paying that. There's no property tax unless we count the pilot tax, which to me is a property tax that comes back to the city. But those are paid for with revenues that are
Not gen-
charged to the water department.
But not general fund,
I
correct?
understand, but that is, I don't see the difference there, Mike.
No, okay, maybe we're just talking past each other, and I may be the one who's not understanding. The pilot tax and the 50% from the TIF,
Yep.
there are no restrictions on the use of those funds.
Well, let's put restrictions on them then, so we
You
can
can't.
count them.
Why?
You can't restrict funds in any formal way. You can try, but the issue with respect to the way that things are.
I understand that, but if I talk to the sanitary
What do
district,
you want to do?
If
I mean, that's.
if I talk to the sanitary district,
Yeah.
okay, they don't have property tax. How do they pay the pensions for the sanitary district? How
What do you
are
mean
they?
they don't have
we
property tax?
collect property
They collect property taxes.
But you also collect,
That's a small part of the revenue,
how much of the total revenue is property tax?
10%.
Okay, does that cover all your pension obligations?
Um,
Or do you cover part of your pension from,
We levy for Social Security and IMRF.
does that cover everything?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're covering all your pension costs
Yeah.
from your levy?
Yeah.
See, the water department doesn't do that.
Well, the water department doesn't have a levy.
I understand, that's my point. So we're obligating, and we don't get any comments about being concerned about paying IMRF for the water department through property tax. Nobody's concerned about that because we have a revenue source.
But we don't pay IMRF through the property tax. The city council's not
I
letting them
understand
do
it, but we
that.
want to.
Yeah, we would
right?
like
All
to.
right, that's my,
Yeah.
That
so
would include.
my point, we're obfuscating the fact that pensions that are in the water department are not paid by property tax, they're paid by other revenue. And we are unwilling to say that same thing when we cross the boundary out of the water department and get over to the police department or the fire department. The fire department generates $2.4 million in revenue, which is labor recovery for ambulance services and for fire protection of NIU.
And where does that money go, Tom?
Yeah, whatever portion of that, and we've talked about this, is a fully allocated cost, including the pension costs of the fire department.
But where does the revenue go?
It goes to pay pensions, Mike.
No, where does the
It
revenue
makes
go?
up the 600,000 shortfall
No,
that
that's
she's
not my
That's
point.
exactly what's happening.
No, that's not my point. You and I are actually on the same page on this, okay? What fund does that revenue go to?
Goes to the general fund.
Okay. And it is not earmarked for the fire department.
I understand that.
Okay.
I understand.
And what I'm saying, okay, and I think we're on the same page on this, is that it should be fully allocated. You shouldn't be allocating only expenditures. That you should also be using the revenues, and I agree with you on this, that you should be using the revenues that are generated by departments to offset the costs of things where they're generating their own revenue.
Including pensions,
Right.
Including pensions, yes. No, I'm,
okay? And I'm saying, effectively, we have a revenue bucket, and those revenues are there, and we're paying 100% of our pension liability, which we're still paying, which we're saying is 600,000 short, and I'm saying it's not short. You're collecting it from the fire department, you're collecting it in pilot, and you're collecting it in this TIF sharing, but we don't count it when we want to
You know,
impose a levy.
I'm gonna tell you, Tom, and
That's
this is the bottom line, okay? We're not. Because if the bond rating agency says you're not paying it,
I understand that.
okay, and so from the perspective of an outsider, even though I agree with you in terms of accounting, okay, from the perspective of, and Molly has used this term several times, in terms of a reliable revenue source, none of those qualify.
I understand that argument, but it's moot as far as I'm concerned. It's
Well-
not a good, solid argument in that we have a 5-year contract with NIU to produce fire protection. And that we have ambulance service for our community that collects revenue, right? And those aren't going away. We're not budgeting them in our 5-year forecast or our projections. I understand there's a technical thing that Moody would like to impose, but the fact is, when you're in a university town, you have different sources of revenue than other people have.
Can I interject one thing on that? And this is something I've been looking at. I think, I understand your point, but what would be helpful is, and what we don't do right now, and I've noticed in a lot of these kind of fees for service, is we don't actually then charge for the 25% we're requiring for the fund balance. So we're not really fully, so if it costs fire $2,000 to go out and do some event, we're charging $2,000. Yet that $2,000 sitting as an expenditure, also by your fund balance policy, requires 25% to be in your fund balance. And we're not recouping that part of it. So we're not actually getting fully made whole. And this is part of the things that we need to start looking at
But we are
as well.
collecting, we are fully collecting the pension costs associated with that burden, because I've talked,
But we're missing that.
we've already
fund
talked
balance
about that
requirement.
numerous times. It's a fully loaded cost. I don't want to get into
Yeah.
it any more
Okay,
deeply
all right.
than
Well,
that,
no, I
but
mean,
it's-
it needs to be the fully loaded cost, and it's
And it should be, and
it's
it
an
is.
empirical question as to whether it is. And if you say it is, then
Well,
fine, then it is.
you were there when we talked to our finance director, who indicated that it was. 3 times I asked that same question, to make sure that it's fully
I'm
loaded.
suspicious.
You want, it's on
I'm
video.
suspicious. No, I'm not suspicious of anything that you're saying. I'm suspicious of the fact that we're fully loading things. Most people don't, but anyway, okay, so this is a calculation issue. I mean, and how you label funds. I mean, in an ideal world, okay, with Moody's, et cetera, what you do is you charge it all to the property tax, and then you recoup that into the general fund in the way that we're doing. But it's specifically noted that, so for example, I agree with you on the pilot. Okay? The whole point is it's supposed to be a payment in lieu of the property
Right.
taxes.
Exactly.
So that money should be going
Into property.
exclusively into pensions.
Right, right.
Okay? Now, at the current time, that payment in lieu of taxes would go only toward police and fire.
It's fine.
Fine.
Okay?
It's fine.
You know, so
We can
that's,
designate that. That's a problem solved. And I
you know,
really,
I mean, on paper, yeah, we can.
okay, and then I really don't understand how a property tax that flows through TIF, and it's pure property taxes, that's the only revenue they have.
But it's not property tax when it gets rebated. It's not property tax when it gets rebated.
But that's what it is. That's the revenue source, and that's what's coming back to us.
But this
I would make
problem-
that argument with Moody. Get them, I mean, it's,
This might be, this point you're making.
because in 2 years, that goes away, and it will be property tax.
Okay, interjection. The point you're making is a good argument to be considered for any further action on any kind of TIF district. Because it is limiting the funds available that could be going toward those pensions. And I don't think that idea should just wither and die away. Molly, I also want to say that I believe, if it hasn't been made crystal clear to everyone already, like the council persons and the mayor, what you just said about the fact that for the fee-for-service, a large enough amount of money is not being charged to cover the 25% internal tax we got already. That needs to end.
I have a problem with that.
Because we're harming ourselves by being inattentive if we continue in that.
Okay. I think, point well taken. As you say, Tom, in 2 years, this is going to be moot with respect to the TIFs. Because it will be. It will be property tax revenue.
Which will account for in that 5-year plan, because I did have some of it
Yeah.
last year. But the city council, when FAC made the recommendation not to do the phase out, I'm pretty sure it was
Yes.
not to do the phase out.
That's
But I know city
correct.
council's direction last year was to consider the phase out. So we're going to be stepping back on what we get from the TIFs in the next few years. But there was kind of back and forth direction on that one, so.
But we did not, they did not agree. They took our recommendation, was to not phase it downward.
I don't think
I
it's a
will
dead
double
issue.
check.
Well, it'll come back every year, but
It's going to
I
come back when we talk about the 5-year plan.
was
so
pretty
we'll
sure
talk about
they
that.
voted
So,
to take our recommendation.
I
So
will
Tom-
go back on that, Tom.
So Tom, in terms of the way that this would flow through to the fund balance policy, let me make sure that I have this correct. What you would argue for would be some percentage, we can argue about whether it's 30, 25, whatever, of expenditures less property tax revenue, less pilot, less the TIF return.
I'm not arguing that. I'm not making that point. Because the more that you add to that balance, the harder it's going to be for council. The more you go in that direction. I'm counting what should be qualified that we don't need to levy for, that we don't take credit for when we do the levy. That's my argument, not this. I mean, I understand what you're trying to do here, and I don't have a big objection if other good communities are adopting this as excellent policy.
I just think it's phased differently because we don't treat it as a transfer, so. that's-
Yeah,
This was me trying to get at that.
It gets you to the same dollar amount, so I don't have a huge problem with it. That's
But see,
my
it
rec-
gets you the same way. If I'm understanding the argument correctly, you're saying that really, when the council decided to use $600,000 that was not coming directly out of the property tax
Exactly.
levy,
Yep.
okay, that money should not have been counted as an expenditure that was any different than the money that was coming out of the property tax levy, up to the amount that we got back from the TIF
Right.
and the pilot.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
saying,
So in that case, in order to do that, all you have to do is exactly what I said. If you subtract those amounts off, then you're not counting those as expenditures.
yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not advocating for that. That's not my recommendation.
Okay, all right, then we're on the same page.
Yeah, my
Okay.
recommendation goes to when the levy occurs and how we ask for the levy and what we count towards qualified revenue paying for pensions, just like the water
That's-
department.
That's fine.
This is more guidance for me and when I write up tax levies, and for the group to
Yes.
read. guidance.
So when we say we're 600,000 short and we're using other funds, I'm saying, no, we're not. We're using these funds, even though we can't directly allocate them, but effectively, that's what we're doing. We're using these funds that I mentioned, the pilot tax, the other thing to cover that 600,000.
The only one that I have an issue with is the contract revenue. The other ones are, you're absolutely right, that those are the equivalent, they're the equivalent to
are.
property tax
Yeah.
revenue. So.
All right?
So I wrote that down.
Okay, so there's other changes here that we need to consider. Most of these, actually,
It's almost all clean up.
it's all pretty much cleanup with the exception of the workers' comp and liability insurance fund got merged, and that's why the other specified funds at the end of Part 2 the new part two
Got dropped.
are changed that way.
It got incorporated, so now it's workers' compensation / liability insurance fund.
Yeah.
So
Just a question on that.
Where are we at?
It's on,
We are on page 20 of the handout. We're in the attachment.
Budget
B.
policy, fund balance policy?
We're in the fund balance
Okay,
policy,
all right.
second to the last page, last full
Gotcha.
page.
Okay.
Workers' comp.
most of the changes are
The
here
rest of them-
spelling out.
You're right.
Okay,
The
gotcha.
rest of it had to do with this 30% number.
Good
It's
writing.
this.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, just on that, so we have $1 million, we know why we set that aside, and we say we need 25% of the liability property insurance fund should maintain an unrestricted net asset of approximately 25% of the annual budgeted expense. Are we saying we don't need that 25%? Because we're not changing the $1 million to something higher.
Right. In that fund, so the liability property insurance fund actually wasn't even at 25% of expenditures. By combining it with workers' comp, when we look at the expenditures together, the liability insurance is a pretty routine for most of their expenditures. And then workers' comp had a decent balance, so putting them together, it seemed like it would be okay. Or I think the balance of $1 million is enough to cover between the two.
So we're reducing our requirements a little bit. I don't know, how much is the total cost of liability and property insurance? What is that expense? 300,000-400,000?
Can you look that up, Bob? The property and liability fund, how much was that on its own expenditure-wise?
What's the expense worth?
The total expenses?
Yeah. I don't know where it shows up.
Oh, anyway,
You know what it is, quick? I just wanted to see how much we're not covering by combining them.
Fair question.
It may not be a big number.
So in total, they're $1 million.
But the expenses, property insurance is costing us what?
There's 100,000 for that one.
And 400,000 for this.
And then you have the the retention cost.
And contracted services is 500,000.
Yeah, so it was probably about half of that.
So
Oh,
200.
no, actually, because this was,
560.
yeah, so it's gone down. But Bob can see what it was before it was merged for sure. That's what he's looking at.
Okay.
So we can come back to that one if you want. What he's looking.
Bob's got it.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the revenue and expenditure policy, and then we'll come back and pass or we'll come back and deal with the fund balance policy. Everything in the, every change in the revenue and expenditure policy is strictly spelling out acronyms. So anything more would be, would not be what's being asked for. Any issues with the revenue and expenditure policy? We already discussed the one item. Do I have a motion to approve this?
I'll motion.
Is there a second?
Wait, are we going, is this the omnibus thing?
No, we're doing them
Okay.
one at a time.
Okay.
We already
Scared me.
passed the
Just this
budget
one.
policy. So just the revenue and expenditure
go.
policy.
I'll second it.
Okay? Discussion?
Just one item. Under 1A,
Yep.
we come right back to that same thing about the levy. As if the levy is our only revenue source, not,
I don't think that language is inconsistent with your concern, Tom. I really don't.
okay, as long as it doesn't lead somebody going to the council and saying, we need to increase property tax because we haven't considered these other items that are, in fact, property taxes, such as pilot and our TIF sharing agreement.
noted that.
Okay?
Yes, I think that's reasonable. I mean, if you would feel better, we can change the word to may instead of will.
I like
Said
that
increase
better.
may-
I would,
All right, let's, yeah, I don't think it does any violence.
So
Because
is that-
that's a true statement. Said increase may need to be added to the overall to avoid underfunding problems. Okay. All right, with that change, are we ready to vote? Okay. Clerk, call the roll, please.
Terzinski?
yes?
Neely?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
Conlon? Parch?
Yes.
Bettle?
Yes. Okay. But Bob, where are we at?
See here, they do have a pretty strong language about corrective action, but there's nothing in the budget. It's crazy.
Liability expenses.
These are things we should be.
Did you hear that, Tom?
I'm sorry.
About 200,000 in liability expenses.
200,000, so 25% of 200 is 50 grand, is what we're foregoing. I don't have a big problem with 50 grand.
All right. All right, do I have a motion on the fund balance policy then?
So move.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? Okay. Clerk, call the roll.
Terzinski?
Yes?
Neely?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
Conlon? Parch?
Yes.
Bettle?
Here, and voting yes. I'm not voting present. I'm voting yes.
5 yes.
I did want to make note, you need one more motion, because when you did the budget policy, you only did it to do the sentence. And now that you've discussed the
All right.
fund balance policy,
Yep,
number
that's
11
fine.
changes. And 12A.
Okay, all right. So, do I have a motion on the budget policy?
So move.
I'll second.
Okay, clerk, call the roll.
Terzinski?
Yes?
Neely?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
Conlon? Parch?
Yes.
Bettle?
Yes.
5 yes.
Confirm our next meeting date and time will be Tuesday, May 15th, 5 o'clock here.
Can I have just one question?
Sure.
Our 5-year strategic financial plan that we're supposed to be working on, how is that coming? What's our,
We are gathering information right now. I have the interns working, getting information from the different cities. And what we're finding out is the 2016 CAFR is still the most recent for most people, but that there were areas of inconsistency in some of the figures, which one of them stood out to me because I saw City of Champaign in one fiscal year only spent like 52 million. They're normally in 80 million. So I asked them to go back and double check some of the figures. So they're correcting some of that, and then we're adding, I think we had items like 1 through 11, remember at the January meeting, and getting data on those. So their deadline to have that information to me is about the end of May, so I can, actually mid-May, so I can try to have stuff together for you guys in June.
okay, so we're on
So we're
track.
still on track.
Okay.
But there might be some adjustments to some of the figures you saw last time, because I did find some inconsistencies there, so we're working on it.
Can I ask a couple of questions? Just
Yeah, sure.
regarding sales tax. I would assume Casey's has been very good for us, the new one, because that place is always busy. And secondly, Carson's, I would assume, we're probably seeing a pretty good bump in the last few months, and they're going out of
Yeah, it's
business.
short-term.
Well, right, but I mean, that's,
Yeah.
so,
So that's some of the kind of highs and lows we'll go over with the quarterly report, because I had, I can't even think today. I'll bring it to your, either the next meeting or the following meeting, depending on the timing of the quarterly report, for us to go over that. And then look at the revenues and how they're coming in, and then the expenditures are on there as well.
Your Honor, do you have any comments to make? And yes, you never lose the title. No. You just like they still call people president when they're an ex-president, so.
Unfortunate.
Do you wish to speak?
Not at this point, just keep doing what you need to be doing. I have questions, but I'm gonna have to buttonhole somebody who's this is difficult to understand.
Yeah.
It's pretty complicated stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not easy, is it? We thank you for your service.
No. Director Talkington asked if we wanted to see, there's a budget video of about 8 minutes.
Sure, I've been seeing that up there all night. It was
So
really.
let's,
Well, she's looking at that,
I
just
go
so
into
you
the,
guys know that Amy
Sanitary
in our
district
department
about
is going to
7
be
o'clock in
backup
the
for
morning.
Carrie, so she's
Think
here
about it,
training.
text me.
Okay.
And then-
Is this something you made, or is it
Maybe you can
something that
PDF
you
them to me or
found?
whatever, I'm sure you guys
This-
have them.
this video?
I just don't see them.
I'm surprised they aren't.
Maybe I didn't find them. That could be.
Oh, yeah.
may I have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.